Hello and welcome to Sci-Lit Journal Club on Wondering Wednesday of BFRB Awareness Week 2022. I am Jen Monteleone, Interim Executive Director of the TLC Foundation for Body Focused Repetitive Behaviors. Some quick housekeeping items before we get started. This is an educational webinar offered in a safe and welcoming environment for everyone attending today. Questions for our guest should be asked through the Q&A feature, and your questions will be answered throughout the webinar. If you have any tech challenges during the webinar, please use the chat box to message one of our TLC staff members, and we will be happy to help you. Our guests today are Hannah, Olivia, and Dr. Darin Dougherty. Hannah received her Bachelor of Arts in Biology and Psychology from McDaniel College in 2021. And currently works as a hematology research technician in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She's interested in a career in medicine or public health. She joined the TLC community in 2014 when she attended her first conference, which inspired her to become a BFRB advocate. In 2020, she joined the Young Adult Action Council, and in 2021 became the head of the Scientific Literacy Subcommittee. Her first scientific paper, Prevalence and Gender Distribution of Trichotillomania, was published this year. Outside of her BFRB work, Hannah is a huge Taylor Swift and gymnastics fan and enjoys baking, sewing, and bullet journaling. Olivia lives in Canada, where she works as a medical scribe, researcher, and direct support worker. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Cellular Biology and Medical Anthropology from McGill University and is now working towards a career in family medicine. Olivia draws strength in part from the Montreal BFRB support group, which she founded and leads. Some things she's excited about are dogs, artistic activism, peer support, skiing, cooking, community-based participatory research, dancing with friends, and of course, BFRB advocacy and scientific literacy. Dr. Darin Dougherty serves as the Sci-Lit medical advisor, and we thank him greatly for that. Please help me welcome Hannah, Olivia, and Dr. Dougherty. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go off camera now and listen to all this wonderful science. Thanks so much for being here.
All right, so I just want to start with a couple things about the Sci-Lit Committee. Our mission statement is basically to make scientific research about BFRBs accessible and understandable to the general public. And we believe that empowering ourselves to trust in the science and use it to advocate for ourselves and our loved ones is a super important aspect that everyone should have, not just people who can understand the papers super easily because they work in the field. We have different degrees of scientific background, but we're all very passionate about talking about BFRB science and research. So a journal club, just basically what it is an informal scientific discussion on papers. So where we digest in depth and place in context of other research. And we are not doctors, and these are not our papers. So don't yell at us if you hate it. Jen already went over most of sort of the house rules, but asking questions in the Q&A, we will answer them as we finish our own sections of the papers. So there are 2 papers we'll be going through. I will be presenting one, Olivia will be presenting the other one. When we get to the end of our sort of talk through about it, we'll start going through the questions, but feel free to start asking them the minute you have them. And then the session works best the more questions people have, so no question is stupid, and feel free to ask them. So I think we'll just jump into the first paper because Jen ran through our introductions, unless you have anything else you want to introduce about yourself, Olivia or Dr. Dougherty.
No,
Guys,
you can have Olivia introduce when she does hers. So go for it, Hannah.
All right. Oh, Olivia, do you want to go through the weird framework though?
Oh yeah, sure. So in conjunction with this journal club today, our committee has put out a little zine with summaries of big BFRB papers that have come out this year. And something that we're working on in the Scientific Literacy Committee is highlighting ways that the sample populations in these papers are diverse or maybe not so diverse. Often that is the case, just given the environment of research that we have right now. So we use the WEIRD framework, which is explained a bit more in the zine, and it stands for Western, educated, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just a way to check whether the populations included in the paper are representative of the global population as a whole. And just a disclaimer, I think pretty much all the papers in our zine were not. They were weird populations, so to speak. They're not entirely representative of the world as a whole, which is kind of to be expected. I think that's where most research falls these days, but it's just something to keep in mind.
All right, awesome, thank you. So I'll jump into the paper I looked at. It's by John Grant, and it is Nutrition and Skin Picking Disorder and Trichotillomania. So some background in the paper. Diet may be a relevant factor in these two disorders because for many reasons, some of them being that NAC and acetylcysteine, which is an amino acid and has shown some benefit in studies in trichotillomania and skin picking disorder. There's also inositol, which is an isomer of glucose. So same structure, same chemical structure as glucose, but a different form, which doesn't have studies showing any effect, but has anecdotal benefits. And symptom severity has been associated with diet in some related disorders to trichotillomania and skin picking, specifically OCD being related to vitamin D and B12. Symptoms getting better with an increase, or Tourette's syndrome, which had a pilot study that showed a gluten-free diet helped. Diet also has some links to impulsivity with added sugar and compulsivity with vitamin E, C, and B12 deficiencies. And ADHD and binge eating disorder have been linked to poor diet and loss of control and overeating. And specifically looking at impulsive and compulsive features, BFRBs have both. So the study was sort of devised from looking at the fact that it has both of those factors, and both of those have different links to diet in previous research. So the aims of this study were to examine the nutrition of adults with BFRBs and the relationship of the nutrition with a range of different domains, problematic behaviors, and mental health issues. And they hypothesized that a high calorie intake from increased sugars would relate to more severe pulling and picking behavior and higher impulsivity or compulsivity. So the methods, it was 196 adults. The average age was 33.36. And almost 24% had trichotillomania. There were about 42% with skin picking, and 33.6% had both. This was a 94.9% female sample and was 83.2% white. So it does fall pretty solidly, and it was a weird sample. And particularly in BFRB research, the research is often overwhelmingly done on women, though they may not have a predominant, there may not actually be a predominance in the disorders in women. The study was done with different questionnaires. So to assess diet, it was the Dietary Fat and Free Sugar Questionnaire, which assesses the intake of saturated fat and simple sugars in the past year and provides 3 subscales: a fat subscale, sugar subscale, and fat/sugar subscale. And then the Massachusetts General Hospital hair pulling scale and the skin picking scale revised were used to quantify BFRB behaviors and severity. The Barrett impulsiveness scale was used to assess impulsiveness and provides 3 different results: the attentional, motor, and non-planning dimensions. So different areas of impulsivity. The Sheehan Disability Scale, which quantifies functional impairment, and then the Cambridge-Chicago Trait Scale, which was used to assess the compulsivity. So the results, there was no relationship between saturated fat and any of the variables looked at, so no relationship to symptom severity, impulsivity, compulsivity, or disability. High sugar intake was related to the variables overall, and when looked at closer, specifically, it was related to compulsivity and non-planning impulsivity, and both of those were increased. So higher sugar was related to increased compulsivity and increased non-planning impulsivity. And then high fat and sugar intake, so that third subscale, that's a combo, was related to the variables overall, but specifically with motor impulsivity being increased. So the sort of quick rundown of the results was that the sugar was associated with compulsivity and one area of impulsivity, and the fat sugar scale was associated with a different area of impulsivity. So to move on sort of to my own discussion and reading of the paper, there are a lot of caveats with this. It's a cross-sectional study, so there was no control group, and it's really not a study you can infer any causality. The results don't mean, sugar caused the BFRB, because the study wasn't designed to look and figure that out. They also didn't collect any information on treatment history, so medication or psychotherapy history, and that could affect symptom severity. It was also the fact that the diet was measured for the year. The impulsivity and compulsivity were measured as static traits. And then the symptoms were, the assessment for symptoms was based on the past week. So there was a bit of a difference in the time periods of each scale and thing looked at. So like comparing a diet based on a year versus symptoms from a week. And it also didn't assess the long-term effect. The study wasn't necessarily looking to, but it's sort of a very early study on nutrition. And there's also the caveat that I think is important in that disorders related to BFRBs are risk factors for eating disorders. So it's an important thing to be cognizant of in these studies and guidelines for nutrition in disorders if they're ever published. So some of the implications from this study are that fat and sugar intake over the year affect impulsivity and compulsivity, but they didn't affect any symptom severity in the past week. So there was an effect in the impulsivity and compulsivity, but they didn't see anything translate into the actual symptoms, which I think is a really interesting result. There are some theories on why this. It could be that diet is involved in the initiation of pulling and picking behaviors through impulsivity and compulsivity, but it doesn't lead to a sort of a day-to-day fluctuation. And with this, it could mean that a focus on diet interventions in people really vulnerable to developing BFRBs could be important and help prevent them. Another theory is that diet may affect impulsivity and compulsivity, which could influence symptoms, but not visible on sort of a day-to-day basis or week-to-week basis. It's also that impulsivity and compulsivity could influence eating behavior and BFRB symptoms. So we could be even looking at nutrition as not even the variable we should be looking at. It could be the impulsivity and compulsivity that affect both how we eat and the BFRB symptoms. And one of the last other theories is that the diet increases impulsivity and compulsivity, but other variables influence BFRB severity. This is sort of common implications and theories that come from cross-sectional studies. Is there's figuring out what variable does what is a really important part of scientific research. And it's that thing that correlation is not causation. Just because this thing is correlated to that doesn't necessarily mean it caused it, because this third entirely unknown variable could be coming in and causing it as well. And this study, though, it points out the need of holistic care in impulsivity and compulsivity, and possibly within disorders that have those behaviors and factors. Because, we're not just a set of symptoms, we have lifestyle, we have all sorts of things that affect the disorders. So looking at lifestyle and symptoms can be very beneficial. And sort of one of the theories that was based on nutrition is that possibly poor diet could influence neurodevelopment, which could influence then impulsive and compulsive traits, which could, in effect, predispose someone to other symptoms or other disorders. And again, that's all theory, doesn't have specific research backing it up, and some future directions for this study are a longitudinal study in dietary intake and compulsivity. So a study that starts at a certain point and finishes at another point longer, where you're following a group of people through then. And then a case control study similar to this, where you would have a group with BFRBs that you're looking at the nutrition of, and then a control group, a group without BFRBs, and looking at their nutrition. So then you have that control to see if there's a difference between the control and the BFRBs in scales similar, like whether the impulsivity and compulsivity relation that was found in this study is also seen in a control group, which could rule it out in being related to BFRBs. This was a shorter study, so I got through my run through a bit quickly, but I can go into some questions now. Let's see, Q&A. So if people have questions, you can pop them in the Q&A. I can sort of go free form on discussing this. I was particularly interested in this paper because I think nutrition and how it affects who we are and how we view food is an important aspect that gets overlooked in a lot of things, and that food isn't just a fuel, it's got cultural and social significance. And I find that very interesting, and I think is an important aspect to remember both when we're doing studies on this and in our own lives. I promise no questions are stupid. Ooh, okay. Oh, no questions. Okay, but thank you, Stefan. That's a very nice compliment. Let's see. I guess if we don't have any questions for this one, I can pass it off to Olivia. And if you think of any, in the meantime, feel free to type them in. All right, so if Olivia, you can pop on and.
Sure. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to get into the paper today, but before I do that, I just wanted to let you all know a bit about where I come from and how I do read these papers. So I have a bit of a background. I'm very early in my career, but a bit of a background in psychological meta-analysis, which means I have read a ton of psychology papers. And I have gotten the understanding that generally there's a lot of really poorly designed and reported psychology studies. My supervisor used to say a lot of that is because if you have a laptop and a scale, you can do psych research. You just need some participants. You can get them through Facebook. It's not that hard to do research, but it is hard to do good psych research. So I feel very strongly about supporting policies that encourage rigorous psychological research and reporting, but then sometimes that means that the research moves through the pipeline slower and the publication process, and that maybe less research gets through to the publication process. And that makes me feel a little conflicted because I also come to this journal club as someone with a BFRB who understands the feelings of frustration and hopelessness at the general lack of research and treatment options in comparison to other extremely common disorders. You know, we do have a body of research that is growing now, and there are treatment options out there, but compared to generalized anxiety, for instance, there are far fewer. So for these reasons, I interpret these papers through kind of a critical scientific lens, but then also from the patient perspective with a lot of joy and hope that when I read that the participants in the studies have experienced any symptom relief at all. I think that's amazing and exciting, even if it's not statistically significant. And I get excited even that the study is being conducted in the first place, because it means that someone sees our community and sees hope for treatment in the future. So I hope you see that my interpretation today is informed by science, but also grounded in the patient experience, because I'm really just seeking to understand how all this research directly impacts us. So with that, if you have any questions or comments from either of those perspectives, just pop them into little Q&A. Okay, so I will be presenting a head-to-head comparison of 3 self-help techniques to reduce body-focused repetitive behaviors. This is by Dr. Moritz and team, and he's actually here today in the webinar. Hello, thank you for joining us. I chose this paper because self-help techniques are a really good resource for our community, especially if folks don't have access to clinicians or doctors who know about BFRBs or other treatment methods. And I also really like that this paper recognizes that the experiences within the BFRB umbrella are incredibly diverse. And you'll see that they tried to address this by adapting the treatment options and also coming up with this new scale to measure BFRBs more broadly. And finally, all the interventions that they tested in the study are made available online for free. So you will be getting that link in the chat. And also maybe later when this webinar is posted in the Void, the link can be included. Because I feel like this paper is just a really great example of patient-centered research, which we're all about. So what they did, there were kind of 3 main aims for the paper. They first seek to compare the 3 self-help techniques. So that was, they were all kind of variants of habit reversal training, which I'll explain more later. They also were looking to determine whether people with different BFRBs respond differently to the treatments that they tested. And then finally, they were using an updated scale to design to measure a broader variety of BFRBs. That includes nail biting, cheek biting, things like that, that aren't usually included in the kind of old school BFRB research. So in the introduction, they gave some context to the study, and they acknowledged that though BFRB research is limited, there is a pretty good body of research that points to habit reversal training. And this is usually guided by a clinician or some sort of therapist or psychiatrist even, as the best treatment choice for BFRBs. And so habit reversal training, or HRT, involves a series of techniques. So there's the initial observation period to identify triggers. Sometimes this is called awareness training. I think most of us who have BFRBs have gone through some sort of either self-help or clinician-guided version of this. It involves progressive muscle relaxation. And then there's the competing response training, where patients perform a non-damaging behavior such as clenching fists like this in response to urges to engage in the BFRB. So that is the first self-help technique that they were comparing. The authors group has also recently developed lesser known variants of this standard HRT, and these are termed decoupling and then decoupling in sensu. So decoupling is when a participant who has trichotillomania, for example, moves their hand towards their head, and then right before engaging in the BFRB, accelerates their hand kind of like this, as I've understood it, in a quick, sharp movement towards another point. So it can be the lap or something else. And for those who chew nails or hair or skin, the mouth can be moved. And that is outlined nicely in the self-help guides, which I really appreciated because it recognizes that BFRBs can look different. And the decoupling technique has been successfully tested for nail biting. So they weren't just going out with no research to back it up. But then the newer, less research technique, decoupling in sensu, is similar to decoupling, but instead of acting out the motions, the participant closes their eyes and you're supposed to imagine the movements leading up to the BFRB, and then right before they pick or pull or bite, they engage in a real disruptive behavior. So the same thing, but instead of like doing this, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about doing that in my brain. And the disruptive behavior, you know, it can be fist clenching, something like that. And so there's currently very little evidence on how effective this technique is. So I was interested to see if it would work. So what they did is recruited participants through Facebook and a website. And then that led the participants through a registration process that ensured everyone remained anonymous. The participants had to be 16 at least or older, with at least one self-reported BFRB. And what I thought was neat was that, unlike many studies, this study allowed participants who were undergoing concurrent treatments. So that means they were taking meds or doing psychotherapy at the same time. The reason that some studies prefer to exclude participants who are doing these other treatments is that scientifically it can be hard to test if your treatment is working, if there's kind of a scramble of other treatments that they're doing at the same time. And there are ways that you can kind of control for this, but obviously that takes more effort. The advantage of including folks is just to get a more diverse sample that's actually representative of the patient population at large, because most people are trying to do something for their BFRB. And if Dr. Moritz has more to say on why they chose to do that later, I would be interested, because it's something that you don't see in all papers. I found that a bit unique. So as Hannah's paper, the majority of participants were female in their late 20s, early 30s, and most had no further psychiatric diagnoses based on self-report, obviously. Depression was reported in approximately 1/4 of the participants, and then obsessive compulsive disorder was actually rare in this sample. Nail biting and trichotillomania, the hair pulling, were the first most common BFRBs in this sample, and then there were a good amount of skin pickers and cheek chewers as well. And the participants had, on average, a total of 1.76 BFRBs, which is cool and important to remember that folks experience kind of a jumble of these behaviors. So ultimately, they had 113 participants included in their analyses. And the way the study ran is, first, the participants took the adapted questionnaire about BFRB severity. That was called the generic BFRB scale. It was adapted from previously well-tested BFRB scales. Just to the questions were worded so that people with cheek chewing, for instance, could read the questions and relate it to their BFRB and then report on that. So they filled that out. They got baseline scores, and then they were randomly assigned to either the habit reversal training, decoupling, or decoupling in sensu. Depending on the group, they were given the PDF instructions through email, and then they were told to start using these self-help techniques. And after 4 weeks, they were asked to retake the BFRB questionnaire, and then it stopped. So the authors found that there was a significant dose effect relationship between the frequency of technique practice and lower generic BFRB scale score for all group, and especially for the habit reversal training group. So that means that on average, the more participants reported practicing the technique, the more BFRB reduction they saw, which I didn't find particularly surprising, but it was good to see that kind of effort pays off in a way. Overall, most participants did see some reduction in BFRB symptoms, a little bit, though the authors defined a significant decrease in symptoms. That had to be a 35% decrease in the GBS score from baseline to post-treatment measurement. So among participants that completed all questionnaires, 10% had significant general BFRB score decreases. That's that 35% decrease. 10% of the habit reversal training group had that significant decrease. 34% in the decoupling group, and then 35% in the decoupling intensive group. And there were no statistically significant differences in how people with different BFRBs responded to the different treatments, though the authors did find a trend suggesting that the decoupling group may show the best results for people without a lifetime history of skin picking, just based on benefit skin pickers. It's just based on what they found. They saw it was slightly less beneficial for the folks who had done long-term skin picking in their group. And interestingly, more than 80% of participants in the kind of subjective post-interview surveys or post-treatment surveys found that the interventions would make more sense if it was used in combination with psychotherapy, which I think is where the treatment landscape is heading anyways. I don't think a lot of people would say to you, if you have access to therapy, don't use it. But given that that requires resources, money, or just availability of therapists, the self-help techniques alone, I think, are good options. So yeah, that brings us to kind of the contextualizing the results now. The study didn't measure whether the responses to the self-help treatments were sustained past the 4-week measurement. So we would call that more of a longitudinal study. It's hard to say whether the benefits continued on after they had finished this research project. The study is also limited by the fact that some participants noted they had trouble adapting the self-help strategies to their specific BFRBs. So I'm sure that could be something that could be fine-tuned in the future. This may point to the difficulties of just performing these self-help techniques without the support of a clinician, as is usually done with habit reversal training. And also adherence was low. So that means that less than approximately 60% of people who signed up for the study at the beginning completed the entire course of treatment and the final questionnaire. That is seen in a lot of studies, and there are certain things to do to increase adherence, but generally it is a concern kind of across the board. And from a patient perspective, I understand why. I've participated in some BFRB studies, and it takes a while to fill out those surveys, to do the thing. It is hard to motivate to keep doing this kind of silly self-help technique if you don't feel like it's working for you. So just from the patient perspective, I hypothesize that that may be part of the reason why adherence was low for this group. My takeaway is that this study is necessary in demonstrating the preliminary effects of these 3 brief self-help techniques for BFRBs. That's what the authors concluded as well. And since the significant outcomes were only seen in the minority of participants, really, further refinement and ongoing examination is required to increase the efficacy of these treatments. That being said, they are all available online for free, and I encourage you to check them out. I have them on my browser. You'll get the link as discussed. Yeah, exactly, here it is. And I hope that you have some comments or questions now, because I was excited to read about this and see that there's BFRB research that is thinking expansively about how we can increase the diversity of our samples, increase access to treatment, and increase accessibility to research, because this paper is available free and the techniques as well. And that's not always the case. So thanks for listening. You folks have questions? Okay, if not. Neat. All right, well, feel
We
free to
are,
email
not
us
to
as
pop
well.
in, but we're also gonna, I know Olivia mentioned it earlier, but we have our zine that we created. And I was thinking, we could do a quick little walkthrough of it. It is available on the TLC website. There should be a link if you go, or it was just posted in the chat, so you can go to that link. But it's also pretty easily accessible from the website as well. So I'm going to share my screen, and Olivia, feel free to jump in on any of them. We'll go through them briefly. We won't make you listen to 7 more articles, but let me get up and just want to make sure the screen is shared with everyone. All right. So we've got the front here. We'll flip through a couple pages. Feels almost like a real book. So we have a nice little, Olivia wrote a nice little blurb on the weird framework, which if you want a little more information about it, it is right in there. There's also a link with a much longer explanation as well. And we have a little bio page. There's Maya, who's also part of the Sci-Lit. She couldn't make it, unfortunately, to the journal club today. She's a very, very busy student. But hopefully for our next journal club, she'll be here. And then each article sort of looks like this. We've got an infographic on one side and our summary on the other. So the summary is still a nice distilled down version of it. And then the infographic is sort of the main hits, the big things. So you'll see each of them does have that weird framework that we mentioned. So yeah, we'll flip through a few of these and I'll pause on them. If anyone has any questions about these or wants to hear more about, how we pick the articles and questions on how we read through them and how we figure out what's most important, feel free, pop them in the Q&A. So this was another one. This was a really interesting one. Very, very detailed on actual brain chemistry in skin picking disorder and OCD. I actually spoke about it if you were at our last journal club. It was the article I presented then. Then if you want to give a little blurb on this one, Olivia.
Sure. So this was just, it was an anthropology paper, go social sciences, on social media groups and kind of the risks of that. And basically the takeaway was, have a support group that is not your online friends, that can be family friends, just in case you do encounter things that are disturbing online. But overall, it is safe and helpful to have online support.
Yeah, this was a really interesting one as well. This was another one that I did, the sleep quality. This one was pretty cool because there was poor sleep quality with people with trick and skin picking, but it wasn't as bad as what's been seen in other mental disorders. So that's sort of a win for us. We get better sleep than some people, but it's also a nice, pretty easily understandable one as well, not as deep and technical, but still really good information that gives a good baseline for future work as well.
This is a study by Dr. Grant. They were trying to associate personality traits with skin picking severity and other clinical measures, or skin picking and trick. Basically, the theory is, some people may be like, what's the point of that? But actually, in terms of the way personality is defined by psychology, you can actually manipulate it through therapy, and this has been shown to be effective. So, for instance, if you have really increased neuroticism, that can be reduced by therapy. And so the aim was to find these personality traits associated with BFRBs and then suggest modes of therapy to address personality trait, which could potentially then impact BFRB severity, et cetera. As discussed previously, this is not a causal effect, so we don't really know if there's causality or even which way it goes. Like, does the BFRB cause the personality or the personality cause the BFRB? Is there causality at all? We don't really know. So it was just kind of a dip in the water of this research at large, and they did find certain personality traits associated with BFRBs that you can read about more here.
All right, I'll go to the next one. I'm also going to try and enlarge things, so ignore this going a little funky for a bit. Let's see. There we go. Now I can zoom it in. All right, I'll do it like that. Hopefully that's a little more readable. This was one I thought was a really important study on clinical presentation of BFRBs in minority ethnic groups. Along with the weird framework, one of the criticisms of it is it focuses on Western, and within Western research, while it isn't necessarily indicative of a global population, even within just research in Western populations, the majority of those participants are white. And one of the things that the weird framework, as good of a baseline as it is it doesn't sort of differentiate between research while done in a Western population that is focused on minority groups. And this was one, I think, especially in BFRB research, as it is sort of a newer field. And it's becoming easier now to find more, from what I know, to find more participants of color of different ethnic groups. But it wasn't always as easy in the beginning, especially. But the study found quite a few differences. They were basing their theory off of the fact that things like eczema and some other skin disorders have differences in presentation and effect in different minority populations. So they hypothesized that that may be the same with BFRBs. And they did find some differences. Minority groups spend more time picking and pulling at their fingers and feet. They also found that they were less likely to have received treatment. And so more research does need to be done on this, but they did find that there was no difference in the quality of life or severity, which is an interesting part as well. So that even though there were differences in where, and even with lack of treatment, there wasn't a difference really in the severity. Some of their hypotheses on why this may be is that there could be a lack of access to healthcare, medical distrust based on whether personal experiences or experiences within their family, and social stigma as well. We know that's really strong. There's a strong social stigma against BFRBs, and a lot of us with BFRBs feel that. And that really does hinder access to treatment as well. So
this is the one I just discussed. See my infographic. I'm proud of it. I think
it's a beautiful one.
We can move through that though, because we just talked about it.
Sorry about that noise. If that was your goal. And that's the end of the zine. We are always hoping to find more young adults interested in helping out with the Young Adult Action Council, specifically the Sci-Lit Committee. We are sort of a smaller group. Not as many people love science as much as we do, but if you do, or you know someone who does with a BFRB, please send them to us. We would love it.
Great. Thank you guys so much. You guys did a great job going through some pretty technical material. And I love the zine. I really highly recommend that everybody go look at it. It really is beautiful. I love that you have the prose, and then you also have the visual part. I think is really important. Go ahead, Hannah. I'm sorry.
No, there was a question came in. Very excited.
Oh, good. Yeah, go for it. Yes.
This is from Susan. And she asks if we ever have issues with literature searches due to some articles using terms for BFRBs that aren't preferred anymore, like acne exoriae for skin picking disorder. So I've done a lot of literature searches to find, like, we make every quarter sort of a rundown of the articles published in that quarter, and based on the previous head of the Sci-Lit committee, Kimmy, which if you went to any of the other journal clubs about a year or so ago, a little over that, she would have been there. And she sort of set up a long search term. It doesn't have acne exoriae in there, so I may add that in, but we do have some issues in that we get some very random articles that seem to have that don't make sense to me why they come in through there. Articles, there are a lot of articles, we'll sometimes get articles on like self-harm, even though BFRBs are not a form of self-harm. And then ones that are just more medical based, there are quite a bunch that come in about eczema. So we have some issues, but we sort of then sort through as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like two sides of the coin. On one hand, we want more BFRB research, but then also on the other hand, it's not an overwhelming number of studies to look through and pick the nice ones out of every quarter.
Yeah, and I just saw something else pop in. Oh, it was the same question coming from two different sides.
Great. Well, again, great job. I think what you guys do is so important. You guys are reading these articles, so you realize how dense they can be scientifically, and asking the average person, not that there aren't people out there who can do it, but asking the average person to distill it is hard, and you guys are providing a major service. I just think it's wonderful. Also, you guys are the future, part of the future of research in this field. So we're lucky to have you. We need more smart people like you involved in this type of research. And I think this is a wonderful launching board for that, for your careers going forward as well. So I wish you the best of luck. Jen, any closing comments from you?
Yes, on that wonderful note, I just would like to encourage our participants to join with me to give this incredible dynamic scientific duo a major round of applause. These two young ladies have a lot going on in their lives, and they do this as volunteers to make a difference for our community, and they are the leaders of the future, and we are so grateful for both of you. To Dr. Dougherty, who is also a very busy doc, we appreciate you giving of your time and your expertise to help make this as best as it can, the best possible presentation for our community. We are so grateful for the three of you. The link to the zine that was shared, I think has been shared once before, but we're going to drop it now again in the chat, and it is on the TLC website for you to take a look at. It is absolutely stunningly gorgeous and has infographics that are off the hook. So you'll definitely want to take a look at that. Awesome public health information for our community. Again, great job, great work. To the amazing TLC staff for putting this event together today, thank you for being here. For all of you for joining us during BFRB Awareness Week for this important information, thank you for being here. Don't forget to help us by completing the post-event survey, which is now linked in the chat. Remember, by completing a post-event survey, it enters you into the drawing for a BFRB Brave box valued at over $150. Get registered now for a couple more days. There's still more to come of BFRB Awareness Week. There's something for everyone. You can learn more on TLC's event page, and that link should be in the chat here shortly as well. And it's not too late for you to wear your BFRB pride like this wonderful beanie. Order your BFRB Brave merch through Bonfire. 10% of every sale is donated back to TLC to support programs just like this. The link to the BFRB Brave merch is now in the chat. And finally, if you enjoyed attending today, please consider supporting TLC by making a donation. This helps us continue to offer programming like BFRB Awareness Week You can make a donation now at bfrb.org/donate. It looks like we might have had some technical challenges with the links, so I will make sure to get those to participants following the event. Again, thank you so much for being here. We wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.